around 2011, I got bit by the Bitcoin bug for no good reason. I was not a tech person. You know, I was not reading Hacker News. I was not like an Elon Musk groupie. I'm all of those things now, by the way. But at the time, I was not. And one of the blogs I followed which was more of a political blog, and not really into tech, but this guy started just talking about Bitcoin, and it came out of left field. And I think the thing that struck me about it was just how little I had thought about electronic payments. Like, in my mind, going to Starbucks and swiping your credit card at the counter or handing them a $5 bill were like totally interchangeable transactions. I never thought at all about the difference between the bare cash in-person transaction on the one hand, which has certain characteristics, like I'm handing you a physical object that has outward markers of money. It's, you know, it's clearly a scarce resource. It has markers of authenticity. When I'm holding it, you're not holding it. We can hand it to you. It's a bare note, you know. I never thought about the differences between that transaction and then electronic transactions, which is just this funny concept where you're, transacting with some trusted intermediary. How do I actually know the money's getting there? And the answer is we're trusting intermediaries to do it. And then, Bitcoin comes along and it essentially creates the same sort of bearer-like transaction, trustless transaction between two strangers without intermediation, but it does it digitally. And that was just sort of a mind-blowing concept for me, because for one thing, I was surprised at how little I had ever thought about it. For another thing, I was surprised at just how big of a breakthrough this was that had never been created before. I'm like, it's 2011. How did it take this long? We've had the internet forever, And then next thing I knew, I was just basically reading everything I could read on the internet about Bitcoin, which in 2011 was not that much stuff. Not that many people were talking about it in 2011. Yeah. I think the price back then was in the either pennies or dollars.
We were driving here and I was literally talking to him about when I heard about it. I was in college. I didn't have any money, but I remember seeing it and I was like, God, I remember seeing, and I was like, how do you decide when is and that was one of the big questions I was going to ask you, is what made you kind of believe in it? But let's continue our tour. What made you first believe that you're ready to jump? Okay, this is going to be serious. Was there anything that just drew you?
I think a big part of it was frankly the price movement in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
that's not exactly the most inspiring answer, but when you watch Bitcoin go from $1 to $150, which at the time was a huge jump, you start to feel like it's real, there's actual energy flowing into the space. And then when you start to see job postings, that was the other thing. Remember, I was a lawyer at a law firm, and making, as a fifth year associate at a law firm, you're making very good income, far more than you really deserve to be paid. And there aren't a lot at the time. Thinking about a job into crypto basically meant going to a startup and taking money.
Right, exactly.
And when the price started to come up and you started to get a little bit of venture capital into the space, and it wasn't a lot of companies, and it was probably really just Coinbase, you started to see some job postings with actual salary behind them. And Coinbase just happened to be pretty much the only show in town. I mean, it was the one company that was credible, whose product I was familiar with, and had a job posting for a lawyer. And I was like, wait a second, why am I not doing this?
Yeah.
So, and now we will walk here.
Oh, so you came.
Living room, this is, by the way, living room, dining room. These are, I've become a modest art collector. So you can see this is LA artist Dashiell Manley right there. I like that. My whole apartment's house smelled like paint for 2 weeks. That's Catherine Bradford.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's sort of this beachy scene, kind of mural-like thing.
So did you have then basically, when you got Coinbase, did you basically have to move here to LA? Was that the...
So at the time I was actually living in LA because I had lateraled over to another law firm.
Oh.
And then I had to move to San Francisco.
Oh.
Which is where, of course, all tech.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's where it is. And then I had this impression that I would live in LA and just drive up to SF 2 days a week. And because it's this startup, it's probably going to fail. There were only 10 employees. And I figured this would just be a nice way to transition from big law into doing businessy tech stuff that I thought would be more fun, which of course it was. What I didn't really anticipate was that it would actually become far more demanding than any, crushing big law job. The big law job that I had before. So, the notion that I could work 3 days a week from LA immediately evaporated. I was I need to work 7 days a week from San Francisco. And that went on for years.
Really?
I think we worked for, honestly, that early core of people probably worked for years straight without a break. It was pretty intense.
7 days a week or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was every day, it was a grind.
It's a grind. You go to a startup that I think we had like 10 people in, as a credit to our founders in the early team, we probably had 400,000 or 500,000 customers by the time I joined as the 10th employee. And can you imagine doing customer support tickets for 400,000 customers with 10 employees, only one of whose job was actually to do customer support? Like, you know how crazy that's
that's no sleep.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's stress.
And then
that's
when you're the lawyer, when you're the first and the only lawyer that comes in,
then
it means like everything that has words on it, hasn't even like been touched by a lawyer. Like the user agreement, the privacy policy. Well, there was no privacy policy, but like certainly the user agreement, nobody had really looked at it. Contracts, nobody really looked at it. What about visa arrangements for some of our new employees who are coming in? I'm not visa, I don't know anything about it. Neither does anybody else.
Yeah.
What about a lease? What about the guy who has to come and get the garbage? Like, is that a contractor? Like, there's so many different things that nobody thinks about when you come into a more established company that you just do yourself as a startup.
I like even with the institute, we're like building out it's just there's so many different things that always pop up. You don't take in consideration all the little minutia, and especially with a tech company, what you guys are. You definitely
no, you don't.
There's so many. Right, visa to technical user agreement. There's. Whew.
For me, the pace and the constant refreshing of things that you have to look at is exciting. Yeah. And if you're the kind of person who wants to just go deep on a single topic and you want to get it to 100% correctness, and that's the thing you want to do, great. Don't go work at a startup because that's just not the content.
This is beautiful, by the way. This piano.
Yeah.
Do you play it?
Now this was a post IPO little purchase. This is like a little present for myself. Yeah. I play poorly, but this is beautiful. That's my little piano there. Yeah. So,
these are great.
I got that. That's my.
It's a good investment.
That's the one orchid that I have that actually stays alive. It's made of Legos.
Hey, did you hear they're moving the price up of Legoland?
Is that right? I think the price of everything's going up.
Yeah.
But according to the Biden administration, inflation is actually falling, and therefore we're okay.
I was just listening to they're getting. Just from if you do overall inflation from when he started, it's 20%. And it's just crazy. They try to like sugarcoat it.
To me, it feels like it feels like criminal negligence to talk about inflation without talking about inflation over a 3-year period.
It's just
because like the numbers are absurd, and so when I read these things like good news, inflation's down to mere 4% a year or 3% year over year in 2024, it's like, well, you're missing the headline, which is everything is incredibly more expensive since 3 years ago.
How do you think that has it been affecting the inflation? How do you think that's been affecting crypto and all that? Do you think that's
it's interesting because for a while, like in the early days, crypto and everything else were like not coordinated. Like crypto was just in its own orbit of financial asset. And that was interesting for a lot of people because they're like, oh, okay, we can actually find this investment opportunity that is not correlated, and who knows, maybe that's interesting for people. And then I'd say around the time of the pandemic, when you started to get maybe a little bit earlier than the pandemic, but you had a lot of different coins out there, and you had more companies starting to get like a pricing signal in terms of like either private markets or in the case of Coinbase going public. You started to see correlation between the performance of crypto and large tech in general. And then large tech in general was itself a function of like macroeconomic conditions. So for a while, then things sort of correlated pretty closely, and that includes the price of Bitcoin. So you would look at basically the NASDAQ, and the price of Bitcoin was sort of directionally consistent with that. And then, so to answer your question, like how is inflation hitting crypto? The answer is it's kind of hitting it in the same way that it's having a macroeconomic impact on everybody, which for tech has been, during the pandemic was great. Mm-hmm. And then we had a little bit of a kind of tail off. And now we're kind of coming back up. Why is crypto coming back up right now? Is it because of like monetary policy? Probably not. I don't really know. But then again, why are tech stocks up? It's hard to answer these questions.
Yeah. I guess that's the $1 million question, huh?
Yeah, that is.
It's like, what is it?
I'm not the authority. You should not talk to me about why the price of Bitcoin or the price of any crypto goes the direction it does.
Do you think, this would probably be more up your alley, is the legal standpoint. How do you think legally, on the legal side, do you think there's going to be more regulations? Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so now we're on the roof.
Wow. This is beautiful.
Yeah, which I actually didn't try and clean before we came out here.
Yeah, this is beautiful. This looks great.
But feel free to have a seat.
Yeah.
Or not. or walk.
No, we can sit. We can sit. This might be the where we can sit and just chill.
Good. Yeah, we'll squint a little bit. But you're asking what legal?
So, what do you think legal ramifications for the future? I was seeing that some of the Congress people were against they were suing or something. They were trying to sue to making the FDA or for making a legal currency or a national currency.
Oh yeah, central bank digital currency.
Central bank digital.
There was a law floating around to basically prevent the Fed from creating a CBDC. Is the acronym for that.
Yeah.
Like, just taking a big step back, I would say that the sophistication of just the intensity of the legal issues and the sophistication of the people working on the legal issues has gone up tremendously in the last 5 years, and the lobbying efforts that have been put into the space have increased tremendously over like that same period of time. We're at a point now where you might have heard of the Fair Shakes Crypto Political Action Committee.
Yeah, I have.
Which
what's your thoughts on them?
Well, my thoughts are that they have, I think, pretty publicly raised something on the order of $100 million.
Oh, wow.
Which is real money, and my understanding is they intend to spend down the majority of that this cycle. So they're looking at putting 9 figures into a handful of races before, in November. And that will be impactful. I mean, you know more about what matters in politics than I do, but my sense is if you pick, your top handful of Senate races and a handful of House races.
Well, especially on the margins. I mean, all this stuff is on the margins. So,
and they're going to focus on the ones that are the most like the, Senate banking committee people.
So therefore, they don't want the central. Right,
CBDC, I think that the general view of the crypto space is the introduction of a CBDC would be more of like the kind of top-down command approach, which is inconsistent with what we want with crypto, which is more of a decentralized. Let's take the trust away. Let's not create a system where we have to trust the Fed to handle monetary policy. Let's create a system where we can just trust the algorithm to establish the monetary policy. But what the industry really is focused on lobbying for is clarity when it comes to things like, well, are we in violation of the securities laws? And we could spend hours talking about, the difficult relationship that the industry and the SEC have had. But I guess I'll just sort of punctuate that by saying, we've had more traction in Congress in the last week than we have had in probably the last 5 years.
Why do you think that is?
The House passed this law, which, they passed a bill. We're going to see what happens in the Senate. But the House passed a bill with bipartisan support, so not just Republicans. So we're getting a lot of Ds coming over onto it as well. That essentially creates more of a roadmap for clarity as between what does the CFTC regulate as a commodity, a crypto commodity, versus what does the SEC regulate. And there's a sort of a path for getting yourself away from SEC regulation for products that are sufficiently decentralized, meaning they don't look like a stock or an investment opportunity. They look a little bit more like, like a crypto utility, like a Bitcoin or an ETH. On top of which, you're seeing the political pressure that's being placed on the agency and Congress lead to authorization of products, which I would say a year ago we would have thought were kind of beyond the pale of the SEC's appetite. The Bitcoin ETF was approved back in, I think, January. That took literally 8 years to get to a place where it was approved. When they approved it, they said, this is, just because we've approved this one does not mean we're going to approve any others. And in fact, we probably won't. And last week, they approved the Ethereum ETF, which is a pretty strong signal from the SEC that, they have to accept that token is not a security. These are major, major, major moments of progress for the industry. They don't sound like a lot, but I got to tell you, they are a lot in the scheme of like the years of kind of intractable difficulty we've had with that agency.
So I'm going to jump ahead then, since it seems like, 8 years is taken. So I was going to say, future predictions of what you see just on a basic standpoint in 10 years. But what do you think 20 years? If you had to do, it's 2045. Where do you think, is everything digital? Is this expanding? Where do you think we go in 20 years? And just in basic,
look, the fundamental promise of crypto, it's just sort of like trustless, programmable money. We were talking about inflation earlier. Part of the reason why there's inflation is because you just have more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services. In fact, that is basically the textbook definition, right?
Yeah.
And that's what causes prices to go up. Bitcoin has a hardwired amount of Bitcoin. It can't inflate that way.
Exactly.
And why not? Because that's part of the algorithm. It's like literally baked in.
Yep.
And you can't change that. Like all of the miners, in order to mine Bitcoin, are agreeing to those rules of the road. You can fork that code into something else, and you would create something other than Bitcoin. But like, there's so much energy and consensus on the Bitcoin blockchain that just focusing on that one currency, it's not going to have the kind of inflationary potential that your typical dollar will have. So if you fast forward into whatever year you were talking about, that many decades into the future.
2045.
Yeah, 2045. And you just think about the inflation we've seen in the last few years, and you think about the debt load that this country has. And you start to extrapolate forward, what does that mean for the value of the dollar? And then you compare that to what will happen to Bitcoin over that time period. I can tell you exactly what's going to happen to Bitcoin because it's algorithmic. There will be a very specific set number. We can go look it up right now of Bitcoin, and that's not going to change in the next 40 years. And the number of dollars in circulation will probably explode.
Oh, yeah.
And partially because that's the only way out of the debt crisis that I think this country really is headed for. This is all a long way of saying, like, I think you're going to see the price of Bitcoin in terms of dollars go up dramatically. Dramatically.
Do you see more people trusting than, that's what it seems?
I do. I think more people, and this is ironic because, Bitcoin is the trustless system. There is no person to trust, right? More people will trust the value holding qualities of Bitcoin than they will the dollar. And we've already seen that in other places that have, we have an inflation issue here in the US, but it's like nothing like the inflation issue in Venezuela or Argentina, right? Thank God we're not that. But in those places, you're already seeing a tremendous amount of adoption of crypto because Bitcoin is already a better store of value than their local currency for the same reasons that Bitcoin, I think, will become a better store of value than the US dollar by the time you're talking, and may even already be today.
Yeah.
In fact, look back over the last 10 years. Look at the price of Bitcoin in terms of dollars.
Yeah.
Why has it gone up so much? Yes, in part because there's like weird macroeconomic things happening, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for like this internet money of the future, but also partially because there's more dollars and there's not more Bitcoin, and that has an effect in terms of savings value. So I see a huge price pressure over that time horizon, and I see very little reason to think that will change. And then I also see like just usefulness.
Yeah.
When you have programmable money, the amount of stuff you can build is basically up to the imagination of a global engineering pool.
It just opens up so much, and it's just creativity.
Look at the internet.
Yeah,
The internet was like the consumer internet as we know it was basically created like, kind of in like the 90s, early 90s. Do you think in 1991 people imagined that you would be here posting your blog, on a website, and you'd be emailing people, and then you'd be watching all of your media content over the internet?
I don't think
Blockbuster would be dead, and so too would most media actually be dead. And by the way, we're getting all of our entertainment now from TikTok. The amount of stuff that can happen when you create this global network that anyone can build on for free is really kind of bonkers. And money has never had that because money always had to go through these trusted intermediaries, and banks had no incentive to change it. Look at the way we do wire transfers right now using the SWIFT system. that technology was from the 1970s. And you know what? It's secure. That's great. But boy, there sure has not been a lot of innovation on top of that platform. Bitcoin, totally innovatable. Ethereum, same thing.
Well, and I think that you made up a great point. I think institutions in general, people, especially if you're 55 and below, your trust in, institutions are so super low. Is when it comes to media, when it comes to almost everything. And you look at it from voting, like who watches cable news? It's 55 and a plus, right? And those are the same people that are probably the biggest voting demographic. But if you look below that, that is where so much growth and what the future of once that 55, basically the boomers it's the people that are below that, and what they're building is what's going to be, in my, opinion, is going to be what's going to dominate.
Listen, look at Coinbase's marketing. They've just released a bunch of really cool commercials, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sort of talk about, how much pizza could you buy with, $20, 5 years ago versus today. And, obviously that's a diminishing number because the price is going up. Whereas how much pizza could you buy with the same amount of Bitcoin? And that is the reverse because Bitcoin's becoming more valuable in dollar terms. And so they're tapping into that energy directly with crypto. It's sort of like, let's forget about the old system and time for the new system. Now, I'm not fundamentally revolutionary because it is sort of a revolutionary message. I'm more of like a conservative, like how did these things compute? But,
so I am cool. Too, in the sense of like, and let's do the final one downstairs. Yeah. But this is my thought: is I actually believe the institutions are very important. We need very good, strong institutions for society in so many ways to move and do it. But the problem is our institutions as of right now are so bought and sold, and when you look at just food and FDA and what we saw during COVID,
capture.
Take away politics from. There's so many wellness influencers out there that all they do is talk about how shit our food is, and the reason it is because lobby efforts down in DC that just pander.
You sound like you're going to vote for Bobby Kennedy, huh?
But there's a reason why Bobby Kennedy has a capture, and if you want to really look about who the podcasting world, the influencer world, it's really just anti-institution. Vivek Ramaswamy is just anti-institution, basically,
Yeah,
he's basically just saying, hey, we've been lied to, and so... and I don't go to the point as far as burn it all to the ground. I'm more to the point as, hey, someone needs to have accountability. We need what Trump wants to do. I love the idea of cleaning the swamp and putting in new, just completely new people.
Crypto is an interesting amalgam of people with really different politics.
Yeah.
I would say the hardest core original crypto people, probably pretty serious libertarian, don't trust the government.
Well, I remember Acapulco and Anarcho.
Yes.
And they were all crypto guys. A lot of those were original.
100%.
Those anarchy dudes.
And they're kind of gold bugs a little bit. It's like ever since we destandardized off the gold standard, it's just been downhill. And within that crowd, I think you'll see more of an anti-institutionalist bent. Yeah. But I would say Bitcoin and crypto generally are a much bigger tent party than it used to be. Yeah. And I don't think you need to be quite as intense in your libertarianism or distrust for all institutions to recognize that there may be value in having a non-dollar denominated store of value opportunity. There may be value in having a way to innovate money innovation outside of the banking system. Right. I think you could hold those thoughts in your head while also thinking, and I want there to continue to be a U.S. government, and I want there to be taxes paid, and I want there to be roads built. I think those are all things that most of us in crypto.
No, and I agree with that, and I think that's I think that's how you win over the majority of all people, as you say, hey, there's value beyond just the anti-institutional.
And by the way, it's a huge number of people who already own crypto. It's like 50 million Americans alone.
50
million? We're talking pretty sizable percentage of the U.S. population is already invested in it. So, when I say big tent party, I really mean that. It's not, and Coinbase has done some interesting polling around this. It's not like it skews heavily Republican or heavily Democrat. It's actually pretty consistent with the population. So you're getting a bipartisan cross-section of a huge portion of the population all agreeing that Bitcoin is something that they want to own for one reason or another. And once you've kind of crossed the Rubicon on should I own it, and you get to the answer yes, that opens up a lot of other possibilities of how should I use it? Am I using it for a store of value? Am I willing to maybe tinker with some of the other Bitcoin application use cases? These people become more probably amenable to discussions about monetary policy when they're thinking, and then when they're looking at inflation, they're probably thinking a little bit in the back of their head about, well, how's my Bitcoin doing against that backdrop? Mm-hmm. And so, you have and this is interesting politically too, because, you can take advantage of that when you start talking about, hey, U.S. Congress, do we want crypto to be a thing that we can build in America where 50 million Americans have already said that it's important to them? Or do you want to just go offshore because your SEC is shutting it down? And, messages start to come through in that situation.
Yeah. And so that's where I think that it goes back to it needs to be a big tent, it needs to get lots of people. And I think that having everyone's support, but I think that in the long run, it is what'll keep pushing it and keeping more in favor, in regulations and just forcing politics in so many ways is that there is a distrust a little bit for some of the institutional stuff.
Sure.
But, no, I agree. What would you say, what would be your advice to young people? So college, we work, the Institute, we're on a ton of college campus, work with a lot of college students. Thoughts, what would be your advice? Should they be optimistic about this kind of new digital landscape? Should they get involved in it? What is your thoughts?
I mean, my highest level thought is you should get involved in stuff that you're interested in.
Right.
And that sounds obvious, but at least for me, it wasn't that obvious. Like I stumbled into college, then stumbled into law school, and then stumbled into a law firm, and then basically did, securities litigation for 5 years before I woke up one day and said, hey, I'm not that interested in what I've been doing. So, I think the first piece of advice is, expose yourself to different opportunities, figure out what you like. There's going to be some things you decide, hey, I'm sure there's some area out there where you're going to think to yourself, oh, this is kind of an interesting sector, or this is kind of a cool concept. And, take it from me, if I could get a job at a crypto company in 2011 as a lawyer, not as a tech person, but as a lawyer, I think most people can find a way into fledgling or niche spaces, but the guiding principle should be do what you think is interesting, because that's the source of the drive, and that ultimately is what leads to success. As far as crypto, I think crypto is like we're in 1990 of the internet. So do you want to be in on the ground floor of the next wave of internet technology? You may not care. You may think, actually, I just want to be a structural engineer. Fine, no big deal. Don't get into crypto. But, if that sort of growth opportunity and build opportunity is something that is exciting to you, as it was to me, I 100% think crypto is a huge growth opportunity and growth sector. And you're going to see, and we already see this, by the way. We see, everything that we're talking about today is made possible by the brilliant work of entrepreneurs who design and build these protocols and make them work and create the structures that allow strangers to arrive on transaction consensus. I mean, there's a lot of, we are in the springtime of cryptography and game theory. It's weird to say that, but there's tremendous work happening in those areas. And so you too, I would say to students, can be a part of these really fundamental changes happening. Yeah. Which is, to me, exciting.
Yeah. It was mentioned earlier, it was like, I remember seeing it, 2011, it comes, you said Bitcoin, and I saw it, and I was like, it's like, but it's like, what is beyond, how do you trust an entrepreneur? There's tons of entrepreneurs. There's tons of people out there selling stuff out there. Is there any, you looked at the money value, you looked at where it was going financially, but is there any guiding principle that you have in regards to that's something to, like, what makes you believe into something? What gives you faith in something? What gives you faith into an entrepreneur or business, or what is that?
Well, the reason I went to Coinbase is because they use the product.
Right.
And, I was really interested in crypto, and I tried to buy Bitcoin early, before like serious companies were involved in the space. And it was hard. I mean, there were like these companies where you had to take cash to a teller at a bank. You had to give them this number that you got, and you print it from the website. You had to tell them, like, you're making a deposit in this account, and then 5 days later, they would finally deliver the Bitcoin into your self-custody wallet. It was just a mess. And Coinbase had a product that was just the best product. And when I saw that company was hiring, I said to myself, well, of course I would rather work for the best company than this thing that I don't understand how to use. So for me, the guiding principle was like, have I used it? Do I understand it? Do I like it? Which, if you're going into consumer products, I think is a great test.
I think it's probably would you use it yourself?
Yes. Don't go work selling a product or building a product that you think is a complete piece of crap. Right. So
it's the same, sales is like, if you're going to go out there and talk, you don't want to be a part that you can't even talk about, and 100%. And like you don't even believe in that works. And
yeah, and so like, is that going to guide you in every conceivable situation?
Right.
Probably not, but like I think it will guide you in a lot more than you might think.
Right.
So love the product you want to work on, and find that, and then work on that.
Yeah. Juan, thank you so much for showing us around and doing our Lincoln Institute podcast /vlog / whatever you want to call it. I appreciate it, and I hope to have you into more stuff.
All right. Thank you.